All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Can I get an adoption of the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second?
All right, motion and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. All right, first up on the agenda for the work session, item 2.01, we have the accessibility audit.
Good evening. It is a pleasure to make a quick introduction to Nick Kelly and Glenn Staten. And we, as you guys know, we issued an RFP almost a year ago now to solicit companies to perform an accessibility audit of the entire district. And if you've reviewed the presentation, you know it was an immense undertaking that we couldn't have been more pleased with finding these gentlemen and their company and their expertise to be able to perform this work. I just don't know who else around who could have done that level of work. So I will let them introduce their qualifications. They're both, I'll mix this up, but they're both certified accessibility consultants and have really just turned over an amazing product to us, and I'll let them present their findings. Thank you.
Perfect. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Kyle. Let's go ahead and get started. So, of course, as Kyle just mentioned, our firm did conduct a entire accessibility audit of all of your facilities across the entire R7 school district. A little bit of background on who we are. This is Glenn Staten, as mentioned. He is the principal of Accessibility Consulting Partners and also an expert ADA technical advisor. He does possess a certification in accessibility, which is a certified access specialist through the state of California. And then, of course, I'm Nick Kelly. I'm also one of the principals of Accessibility Consulting Partners. I've got a number of accessibility certifications from Registered Accessibility Specialist to ADAC, and then as well as a handful of geospatial certifications as well. Quick little overview of the agenda. I'm not going to go through each of those things, each of the different topics, but we're going to cover what is the ADA, what's the purpose of conducting a self-evaluation, and then the piece that you're all most interested in, what were our findings, and kind of what are next steps going forward.
So ACP, we are a ADA accessibility consulting firm based out of Colorado Springs. We provide ADA services to state, local governments, and private entities. Combined, we have in our office over 40 years of experience in performing this work. And these are some of the services we offer: self-evaluation transition plans, ADA inspections, ADA training consulting. So what is the ADA? The ADA is not a building code. It is a civil rights law. It prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Do I need to get closer? There you go. It prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. The purpose of the law is to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights, equal rights, as everyone else. It's not about special rights, it's equal rights. So what is a self-evaluation and transition plan? As part of the self-evaluation transition plan, we identified areas of non-compliance and developed specific strategies to bring all policies and practices into compliance. Structural changes needed, policy modifications, providing public notice that includes explanation of the application of the ADA to the state and local government programs, activities, and services, contact information for the employee who is designated to address ADA compliance issues, and information on the grievance procedure.
So this is one of my favorite parts of the self-evaluation. Of course, this wasn't conducted, but it's something to kind of think about. So under the ADA, Title II entities, which Lee Summit School District gets Title II funding in that regard, and is the Title II entity. Well, with that, it requires that individuals with a disability, community members that are represented by, or individuals with disabilities represented by disability advocacy groups and so on, shall be involved in the self-evaluation process. And that process typically takes place in a public outreach, much like this. And so basically all it is you allow the community to get involved and understand what are the barriers, so that way they can voice their concerns and say, hey, these are what we see as high priority barriers. This is how we would like to see things moving forward. And then at that rate, it's up to this, in this sense, the school district to figure out what's the best course going forward. What is something that we can do to ensure that we're going to meet the needs of all individuals and community members alike. And this specifically comes out of Part 35 of the Department of Justice regulations. So what we did, because there's a lot of different tasks in self-evaluation, but specifically for the school district, what we did do is, of course, we conducted an assessment of all school district facilities in LSR7 school district. We did a compliance analysis. This is doing an analysis based off of the 2010 ADA standards. There's a lot of scrutiny there, and we scrutinize it against all the different criteria that is within the 2010 ADA standards. And then finally, what we have done for you all is we provided you all with a draft transition plan. And that draft transition plan is kind of a two-parter, right? So you've got the high-level report that was provided to the school district, but most importantly, the most critical deliverable that was provided to the school district was a data table. And within that data table, you're able to actually identify what barriers were, or you're able to locate the barriers that were identified and kind of figure out a next step and game plan as you move forward in this process. So as mentioned, if you don't mind, I'm just going to hold this. So as mentioned, we looked at 33 facilities across the school district, from aquatic centers to early education facilities, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and so on. And I'm sure you all know what facilities are within your school district, but we did provide a complete list of each of those facilities that were identified. And at some points, what you will notice within the data table as well is we are very specific on how we break certain facilities out. So some instances you might see, say, Lee Summit High School is broken out into 4 separate facilities because there's 4 separate standalone buildings, including the high school itself. So if you do see that, that's the reasoning and rationale behind that. And then people like maps, or individuals like maps, and they like to be able to see, okay, where are the school districts, or where are the school facilities throughout the school district? And from here, what's really kind of nice is you can drill even further and create geospatial maps on identifying priority areas. And you're able to do that with the data we actually provided to you, because we've got a priority matrix that we've created in-house to help you better understand next steps moving forward, instead of going, okay, great, you guys provided us with all this information, but we don't even know where to begin. What we've done based off of our priority matrix is we're able to give you prioritization on what we believe should be completed next and what's something that should be pushed to the back burner. And that's something that you can certainly adjust as you please. So again, we looked at barriers. Well, what are barriers, right? So the barriers are in this sense, architectural barriers to individuals with disabilities, but not just individuals with disabilities. And that's one of the things that we really like to hone in on, is the ADA, again, is it's not just about individuals with disabilities, but it's about equal access and equal opportunities for all community members alike. And the reason why that's so important to mention is because at any point in time, any one of us could get a disability, whether that be short-term or long-term. So even if we don't have a current disability at this point in time, you never know. Next year you might end up with one, and you're gonna be like, gosh, I really wish there wasn't that barrier there. And so that's something we look at. We look at it from a holistic standpoint. So part of the priority matrix, one thing we did incorporate is what we like to call mitigation difficulty. Mitigation difficulty is the rough order of magnitude to remediate barrier. So to put it in layman's terms, we've got it into 3 categories: low, moderate, and high. Low is gonna be a barrier that could be somewhat easily achieved or maintained or remediated with maintenance staff. So there's a little caveat there, because we could say, hey, moving a sign is a maintenance item, but then you're gonna go, oh my gosh, we have 17,000 signs to fix. we can't do that in-house, and that's not a maintenance item. So that's something we also consider and something we like to have as a constructive dialogue and discussion with the school district after the deliverable has been presented. And then high is something that's going to require significant planning. That's going to be something that you're going to have to incorporate into your budgets into later fiscal years, because you're going to have to move a wall, or that be a load-bearing wall, or significant concrete work. And then moderate is kind of that, it's kind of the awkward one. It's right in the middle. Is this maintenance? Is it not? Really depends on the district's bandwidth really at that rate. So to provide you with a couple examples, I'll start with low mitigation difficulty. So you can see for the first three that I've provided, the first one being a coat hook. Again, that could be easily remediated with maintenance staff. You know, you're just lowering it to the compliant height. The next one would be signage. I just mentioned that. Again, there's a lot of signage issues, not just here, but really kind of nationally at that rate. And then finally, another low mitigation difficulty would be the height of a grab bar. That's so true to find, especially in a school district, because you're dealing with so many different age ranges, from the elementary school to the middle school to the high school. And it really is kind of difficult to be able to pinpoint and identify what is the specific height supposed to be. So oftentimes what we see, not just in Lee Summit, but across the United States, is that's a common barrier, because there's different requirements for different age groups. Now that moderate, a good example is this vending machine. You know, we saw a lot of operable parts like that. That's not going to be a significant overhaul. You're not going to have to incorporate it into your financial budgets 4 years, 5 years from now. But you might have to find a new vendor that provides you with a vending machines where the card reader or whatever operable part it is within compliant reach range. And then, of course, you've got the height of a sink. That one, again, it really depends on your all's capabilities and bandwidth. And what I mean by that is that something that in-house you're able to achieve. And then finally, gaps in surfaces. Gaps in surfaces oftentimes are easily remediated with some type of filler. And we see that all across the exterior of your sites. And it's because we've got different temperature fluctuations and the salt that we put down. It's just a natural occurrence, and that's something just to kind of keep up on. And then finally, we've got the high mitigation difficulty. High mitigation difficulty, again, this is going to require a major overhaul. In this specific instance, on the first image on the left, is you don't have that proper clearance, 42-inch clearance in front of the swing of the door, so you're going to be having to remove or significantly remediate that entire restroom itself. And then concrete work. This is common. You see this in most restrooms where the floor drain causes significant slopage. And if you think about that, as someone's transitioning from a wheelchair to the toilet, it's an unsteady surface, and it could cause, at that point, a really safety issue. And then finally, curb ramp concrete. Anything you see concrete, just know it's going to be a high mitigation difficulty. So self-evaluation process. Okay, so now we've done the self-evaluation. Now we're in the transition plan phase. So you've all been provided that data table, which we call the TPD, transition plan data table. That's really where you all take this information and you start to formulate a game plan. And we're more than happy to help you navigate those next steps, as that's one of the services we certainly offer, because it's overwhelming, right? You look at this data and you see the numbers, and the first thing you want to do is run, honestly. And so within the transition plan, you have to identify barriers. We've done that. Second, identify who's responsible for remediating these barriers, which different departments throughout the school district will be assigned for responsibility. And then finally, you have to specify a schedule. And within that schedule, you're able to create that schedule based off of our priority matrix that we have incorporated into our data table. So within that data table, there's a significant number of rows and columns, but let's really focus on the most critical ones. The most critical one you want to know is first off, where are the barriers? What are the barriers? What is the recommendation for remediating those barriers? And just know those recommendations for remediating those barriers, they come straight out of the 2010 ADA standards, and also from our experience with working with the Department of Justice as well as the United States Access Board. So these are something that we've accumulated over the course of really over a decade at this rate. So we've got a little bit more refined recommendation on remediating barriers. Prioritization, again, I talked about the priority score. It's based off of a complex matrix, which we've also explained on the final tab of your data table called facility prioritization. And then the last bullet point, this is where it's really your all's next steps. It's identifying, we've provided a column for who's responsible. We've identified a column for creating a schedule. Fiscal year schedule is typically like what I like to put in is FY24, FY25, so on and so forth. And then what's the status of the project? That way we're all kind of on the same page. We understand where we're at on this. So that way if there ever is a complaint or a citizen or an outside source files some kind of complaint, you're able to go, okay, this is where we're at. And this is what we're able to tell you we can do going forward or next steps. So this is the sticker shock, right? So we identified over 14,777 element-based findings. So what is an element, Nick? That's the real question. You all are standing or sitting behind a desk. Let's consider that desk as an element, right? And within that desk, there are a handful of attributes from the height of the desk to the depth of the desk to the surface that you're sitting on. Those are all attributes that are tied to that specific element. So of that element, we found over 14,000 of those types of barriers across the school district. And then of that, we found 69 not best practices. What is a not best practice? A not best practice is something that the ADA doesn't specifically say, hey, this is not compliant. It's more of an advisory of what they recommend you doing. So as an example, the traveling behind, so if an individual gets out of their vehicle from the accessible parking space, it's probably a safety issue for them to travel behind the vehicular way because it's low clearance. And then the total estimated cost for barrier removal, which we got that cost, by the way, from RS Means. It's an outdated book, I will mention, but we do incorporate the inflation rates over the course of the however long it's been posted. At this point, it's been about 10, 15 years, to be honest with you, since it's been last published. And so we incorporate the ADA RS Means into that for opinions of probable construction costs. One thing I really want to point out when you look at these is, yes, it's a significant number. But Glenn had just mentioned we've been doing this for quite a long time, in fact, over a decade. And you're not the first one. In fact, I'm actually, take it for what it is, I'm kind of surprised it's not much higher, to be honest with you. And I don't mean that in any derogative term. What I mean by that is we see so many barriers across all different facilities, across all municipalities. It's just something that your neighbors are dealing with, you're dealing with. So instead of looking at this and going, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? This is so overwhelming. We've already got all these budgets and everything's so tied down. What we do is we take a step back, take a deep breath, look at that data table, and let's be methodical about how we move forward in this process of barrier remediation. And then if there's ever a complaint from a citizen or a parent, whoever it may be, about a specific barrier that they've encountered in your in one of your site locations, you can utilize that data table as a tool to help educate not only yourselves, but also the community in saying, this is where we're at, this is what we're gonna do about it, and this is how we're gonna do it. And so that's ultimately what that's done for you. And then I'm just gonna kind of breeze through some of these so that way no one has too much heartburn. But we wanted to point out a number of your facilities that have opinions of probable construction costs that are over $500,000 in remediations. The first two is Lee Summit High School and Lee Summit North High School. One thing I want to point out is I was actually in Lee Summit High School. It's one of your most updated facilities. Believe it or not, everywhere we've gone across the country, we always get the clients that say, oh, it's a new facility, it just got freshly remodeled, it's gonna be perfect. Sometimes they're actually worse. And the reason why is because you've got so many different moving pieces, from the architects to the contractors to the sidewalks to you name it, and one piece of that puzzle kind of slips through the cracks. And then from there, it's a domino effect. So it's really no fault of anyone. This is just something we kind of see everywhere, especially when you deal with contractors that are saying, I've been doing this for 20 years, I'm not gonna change my thought process. That's usually where you see those hang-ups. So moving forward, the last two that were over 500,000 is Lee Summit West High School, as well as Prairie View Elementary School. And then facilities that have an opinions of probable construction costs between $250,000 and $500,000 are the 11 schools outlined here. I'm not going to go through the list and name every single one, but those are the 11 schools. Anything beyond this point is less than $300,000 or $250,000 in remediation costs. So next steps, I've already kind of talked about it, and I've been very intentional about that throughout this presentation, is we got to work together as, as team members throughout the school district, different department heads, take a look at the data table, really kind of soak it in, and we're here as a resource if at any point any district member says, we just need a better understanding on how to utilize this data table, we're more than happy to help you with that. We're more than happy to provide you with our guidance on how to move forward and what we would recommend through this process. And then of course, before you can really create a schedule, each different department needs to know what their different budgets are, because before you can't just start throwing numbers on a schedule without knowing what your budgets are and what your actual expectations of each other are. And then most importantly, adopt the transition plan. Now that you've got it in your possession, now's your opportunity to really kind of take control of this. It's just one stepping stone. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And in fact, something that's probably not going to happen in any of our lifetimes, just because it's an ever-evolving process. With that, we first off appreciate you allowing us the opportunity to come up here and present. But I'd be more than happy if time allows. I don't know how long I spoke, so I do apologize. But we'd be more than happy to address any questions or comments that you do have. And I know that was a lot of information that I just threw at you, but be more than happy. So I'll open it up if you do have any questions.
Board Member Miller.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was fantastic. I did have a couple of questions. Were there any items that you felt like needed to be addressed now? Thinking about, I'm sure you can say yes to that, right? But what I'm thinking about is safety concerns for our students, for our staff that are like, hey, these need to be addressed immediately, like that are prioritized above others.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's kind of a two-parter answer, if I may. One was from experience, being on site, and then the first one being from just key observations through the data table itself. I'm going to hold this again, sorry. So the first one that I would like to point out is really your low-hanging fruit. Something that could be easily remediated, something that could be achieved. Again, your low-hanging fruit is something that you don't have. Most faculty could probably take care of, shall I say, in some instances, those being at your entry points. So the Department of Justice has their own prioritization, shall I say. It's called intrinsic priority. Priority number one is entry. Those would be one of the highest priorities, was what I would say. So door pressures to the entrances of your facilities, because that becomes honestly, at some points, a safety concern for some of the younger kiddos that are running around the schools. And then really anything that protrudes within the walking surface or vertical clearance. Believe it or not, there was a little bit of a joke throughout the data collection, but a lot of artwork is hung from the ceilings, and I think it's great. It's a great way to demonstrate or showcase your students' work. But one thing we have seen is this isn't a concern for the children per se, it's more so the parents. Is if someone has a low visibility, some of those things could actually get them in the eye. And it's funny, there was that joke, and I kid you not, 2 weeks later I went to my kid's daycare, and I wasn't paying attention, and a piece of paper hit my eye, and I was like, told you guys. But the second piece I wanted to mention from a safety concern is the wax. We never really thought about it, right? But when the floors are waxed at night, which is, it's a necessity. I'm not saying don't do it, but it creates a very slick surface. And so that's one of the things we look at. It's a roughness calculation, shall I say, to see how slip resistant the actual surface is. And when it's quite slip, it's not just a safety concern for individuals with disabilities, but as well as the general public, right? I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions at this time, I have one for Dr. Shelton.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So hearing this presentation today, what are our next steps?
On. Can you hear me? Okay. So, as you know, we have a comprehensive facility master plan. That plan is very much all-encompassing, and we will include this in that plan. We have a plan to address our roofing needs. We have a plan to address our mechanical needs. We have a plan to address our future-ready learning spaces needs. And this will be part of that overall master plan that we have to address all of our facilities. So we'll incorporate this. And as Nick and Glenn have said, we'll take that spreadsheet, and we got a lot of spreadsheets within our departments, and we'll incorporate this list of items that need to be addressed, highest priorities, rising to the top first, and then build that into our plan. And as what Nick and Glenn described, you'll see as part of the FY26 and FY27 and moving forward, which of those items will be building into that plan.
Sorry, thank you. Now we do have a couple questions. I'll start with Vice President Eslick.
Also for Dr. Shelton. So seeing that we have probably over $1 million of what I would consider almost rework for some of the facilities that we just recently touched and some brand new facilities, knowing that that's a possibility, what are we going to do in the future as we go maybe to build new buildings or go in and remodel existing facilities to make sure that we're not having to experience this sort of thing again?
Great question, actually, and as we met with Nick and Glenn today, Kyle and I did, we had that discussion, and our value add coming out of this report is that we will bring this topic as a specific topic to our design teams moving forward. So as we sit down with the buildings and the architects and maybe the construction managers, if they're at the table, and definitely the general contractors after the project's been awarded, that this is a priority. We have to make sure that we are meeting all ADA requirements moving forward. And so as Nick and Glenn mentioned, as these projects, as they are very large and very complex, sometimes things get missed. And we just need to take the priority and take the time to make sure that nothing's missed. They also, it was interesting to have the conversation with them since they're experts in this field. What's good today may not work tomorrow. As codes and regulations change, what was compliant, 20 years ago isn't compliant today. And we were talking about doorstops and how, in this part of the country, as weather gets hot or weather gets cold, it becomes more or less difficult to open up a door. And so, what might be non-compliant in November might be compliant in May. And so those are just some factors we have to keep in mind and consider. But to answer your question, just to bring this into the conversation in the design phase with the architects, with the architectural team, with the design team, and with the contractors moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I do have just one more, and I'm not sure who would be the best, probably our gentleman over here. So now that this has been evaluated and we have issues that have been identified, obviously it's not reasonable that everything's going to be fixed tomorrow. So with regard to, I guess, a legal compliance and just like having the plan in place, is there anything that we need to consider in terms of like the speed of how quickly these things need to get done to avoid any sort of issues where, a constituent may file a complaint or there's some sort of inspection that's done? I think you kind of get what I'm trying to ask, I hope.
I certainly do. Excuse me. So, yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So with our connection to the DOJ, that's one of your biggest entities that you are probably concerned of when it comes to ADA barriers. When it comes to the DOJ, I actually just spoke with one of our contacts over the DOJ about a year ago, and it was that same question, because that question's always ever kind of evolving, right? Or the answer, shall I say. So the DOJ wants to see that you can get this all done in the next 10, 15 years. We all know that that's probably not reasonable, especially depending on the budget constraints you have, the size of the municipality, whatever it may be, or the entity, shall I say. So what we always like to iterate is try to achieve getting these barriers remediated in the next 10 to 15 years. But do know, it's a living, breathing document. Things are going to continue to slide. It's just things take precedence over the next. There could be a natural disaster that takes place, and all of a sudden, hey, we have to put the ADA, or a global pandemic, and we have to put the ADA on a pause, or the remediation efforts on a pause. And that's completely acceptable, just so long as you're showing that you're doing something. And by doing something doesn't mean that you've fixed all you do for the next 10 years is change the door closers, make sure the speeds are right. No, you're actually making meaningful impacts, right? And then second of all, something that I would like to really stress is if at any point a community member voices a concern about a barrier, or say my student or my son or daughter or child or whatever has this disability now, and they're having difficulties accessing specific programs, services, and activities across your district facilities, that suddenly becomes the highest priority. It doesn't matter if that was something that was planned out for 10 years from now. I'd raise that to the top and figure out a way to remediate that barrier, even if that means some of the other higher priority facilities kind of slide. And that's what I'm kind of talking about, is it's going to continue to ebb and flow throughout this process.
Thank you. That was kind of what I was curious of, is if the way that it's prioritized is kind of in alignment with the buildings where we have students or we have staff members who might struggle with the barriers that are in those facilities, and prioritize that first. Or, I mean, I'm sure that's going to be kind of the nut to crack on the operations side and figure out how to address it. But I think that sort of answers that question on where that priority should be. And it sounds like the answer is yes. If we have students or staff, we can't obviously anticipate every time like a parent or a grandparent may come in. We might not know, but I think we're going to have a pretty good idea about our students and staff and the status of what their needs might be. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Board Member Haley?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for Dr. Shelton. This is going to be kind of a corollary to Board Member Eslick's question. But do we contractually obligate our vendors to construct our projects to meet ADA? Or is this something that we're just going to need to have a discussion about? Because again, it does seem a little troubling that we've just put a significant amount of investment into Lee Summit High School, and now we're being told that we're not compliant. So I guess my question is, how do we proactively get out ahead of this in the future so that we don't end up right back where we're at right now?
Well, checks and balances, as was mentioned earlier, we need to bring this topic to the table in a very deliberate, meaningful, thoughtful way with the design team, and then after the design team, the construction team. And then after that, then, as we talk about like inspections and follow-up post-occupancy evaluation, to ensure that what was designed was what was built. And so, as we would not design something to be out of compliance.
Sure, I understand.
But sometimes what gets put on paper is a little different.
But our vendors understand we expect everything
Yes.
to be compliant.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So if something weren't compliant, would the responsibility rest on us, or would it rest on our vendors?
So, Kyle's coming to the front there, but, we have a warranty time period. And when a project is done, you have a period of time where, if things aren't to specifications or our satisfaction, then we can go back. After that time period, though, is something that then we'll probably need to observe.
I assume when we make these contracts, we don't specify paragraph 3, blah, blah, blah. It's just, we want everything to be ADA compliant, in a more of a generic sense. Would that be the case?
Yeah, Kyle, I'll let you.
At times, that's the case. Generally, in today's world, though, most of the products that are specified meet ADA requirements. The systems and assemblies that are there. It's just become such standard practice in the design and construction industry. The constructability of items is kind of where we get into some of the issues. So I would also just like to add to, just as a comment, that we have not evaluated the data to really determine how many of these attributes are related to new construction areas. Now, we did renovate almost every educational space in Lee Summit High School, but most of the areas that we renovated, there were cosmetic changes, and we took down walls and did some things. But You know, that's not to say that our project was to make that entire campus 100% compliant with ADA. So we will go back and look and find the items that were found that were in our construction areas that should have been handled, and that would be non-conforming work, and we could turn that in and have them address that as a warranty item. Another quick thing I just wanted to add is that we have already begun to address some of these issues. First of all, I want to say their data table, it's for a guy who likes spreadsheets, it's amazing. I mean, he's not joking, 24,000 rows and about 30 columns. It's the biggest spreadsheet I've ever gone, but they have made it very easy to manage data, you know, to pull out the right information. So sorted it. We had 2 entry access buzzer systems, 2 in the district that were above the standard height. So we've already contacted our vendor. We're going to get those modified. This summer, knowing that this data was coming in, we hired a concrete cutting company. If you walk around the district, you've probably seen some of the concrete cuts that have been done to our sidewalks. So they walked the entire district, every sidewalk, every piece of concrete, and have cut the concrete to an ADA slope to meet requirements. So we'll take the data that they provided, compare it to our transition plan, and I would like to think that almost every one of the concrete items that they found that our concrete company addressed this summer. So we'll keep working on those maintenance items and check them off as they come up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Board Member Miller?
Thank you. And I had some of the same questions, so thank you, Vice President Eslick and Bill, for those, because those were some of my questions. But my last question was, can the board be provided with like an unredacted full report of the audit for us to review? Just to see, I mean, I'm thinking about like, you know, due diligence of our budget and thinking about where we're spending money, and if there's specific ADA things that we need to address over programs or over other things that we're purchasing.
Yeah.
I just
Be glad to share the data table. I mean, it's a document that if you like spreadsheets, you know, it's a tremendous amount of information, but really valuable information
Yeah.
that shows us exactly where the problems lie and how they're prioritized.
perfect. Thank you.
Board Member Myers?
Yeah, my question kind of piggybacks off of Mr. Haley, because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking not only Lee Summit High School, but I mean, we just did massive work over at Mason, and Mason's making the moderate list. So I guess there's a part of me that's hopeful that maybe there are some things that there's some follow-up.
Sure.
I think that's kind of already been asked. That was my question, though.
So I know Dr. Barger really wants to get going, so. No, and I'll just give an example, because they showed a picture of a floor drain. So, you know, an architect's our engineers are gonna show floor drains in restrooms. You know, I'll tell you honestly, doing this for a long time, I've never seen somebody go back in after construction and put a level on a floor drain to make sure that the exact slope to that floor drain is what it should be. And I'll tell you, Ken Anderson, sitting back here, guy with the gray hair, Kent manages our design standards. We have a full design standards manual that we give to the architects that are all of our lessons learned, that we communicate with them things that, whether it's a product, whether it's an execution of how we know we want a product installed, we take our experience and we communicate that through that document to our design teams. So we'll take this document, look for those little things like a floor drain. Don't just specify the floor drain. Let's have them go back after the fact and look at the slope and make sure that it was installed right. Because many of these items, I mean, I hate to say there's just not fault. I mean, they should be doing it right, but there's not a typical process if you don't know about it to go back and verify some of these really minute details that are constructed.
Can I ask a quick question on this? Sorry. About the floor drain thing. I'm just really curious about this because it does seem like you said it was minute. I would probably use the same word. So my question is, if we have like somebody who's in a wheelchair, for example, and they're trying to use the restroom, and the floor drain is all the way on the other side of the bathroom from where the handicap stall is, and the slope might be different from where the floor drain is as where the actual spot is where that student or staff member might be trying to exit their wheelchair, and maybe that slope at the floor drain across the room doesn't matter. So how nitty gritty does this get then at that point with that sort of non-compliance?
So I will speak and then I'll let them correct me. So here's what I would say. Every single little corner of your building does not have to be accessible. We cannot discriminate. We have to allow everyone equal access to our services, our programs, everything. But if we can provide access in a way that avoids barriers that we have, we can do that and not spend money. Now, everybody has to be happy with that. Everybody has to be fine with that accommodation, we could call it. But that is a choice that we have, I believe, under Title II, is to provide that reasonable access to our programs. Now, I'm not sure about like a floor drain that's across, because how would we really know if a person in a wheelchair is going to not go to that corner? But anyway, am I correct?
So one piece I want to mention too, thank you for that, Kyle, is so let's say this specific example, it's a really good example, is in a standard stall or somewhere, say let's tucked in the corner, and it's not within the circulation pathway, the general circulation pathway, or say the accessible stall itself. We're not going to identify that as a barrier. Now, sometimes we will grab some of those elements because it's kind of subjective. We don't know. We don't know the daily operations of that specific room space. But for the most part, is if it's not within the circulation pathway, it's not technically an ADA barrier, so therefore we're not going to identify it. And then one last thing, if I may just point out for all this, oftentimes by you remediating one barrier, you've also remediated a handful as a good example, or a number of barriers. As a good example is a protruding object, say that being a paper towel dispenser. If you've recessed it in the wall, whatever it is, you've also potentially identified or addressed the operability of it, the height of it. You've already addressed like 3 or 4 things right there. So something to consider as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one last question. As far as the detailed spreadsheet report, does it break down which items are an ADA recommendation versus a just best practice recommendation?
Yes. I'll keep it short.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for your time. All right, with that, we will go to item 2.02, the Continuous School Improvement Plan Success Ready School Network and Continuous Improvement Framework.
Yep, lots of acronyms in that title. So this particular topic actually is one of my most favorite parts of my job. It's really the idea of how we think about system improvement. We call it school improvement, but at the district level, it's district improvement. How we build strategic plans and how we continue to improve what we offer our students systemically. So there are a couple of pieces that are more and more becoming commingled, and we wanted to make sure that the Board of Education had a really good understanding of the relationship of those things and how they interplay. And that is the SRSN and the CSIP. And so just sort of a primer on how those things come together, and then a little bit of detail as we move forward. There are both internally guided school or district improvement measures, and then there is external accountability that is provided to the district. So when we think about DESE accountability, or how we're held accountable externally, the old way, if you will, is our APR, Annual Performance Report, in which we would get sort of a percentage at the end. The district got this number of points, and you added it up and divided by the points possible, and that was your percentage. And there were various ways that districts could get percentages and so forth. And for the majority of the districts in the state of Missouri, that's still the way accountability is measured. There is a new way, and that is because we as a district, with board approval, joined the Success Ready Student Network, which is an organization, we'll talk a little bit more about it here, in which 20 districts, and actually it's now up to 37, but when we joined 20 districts, applied to the State Board of Education to receive a waiver. We'll talk more about the waiver here in a minute, to get an alternative APR, an APR that we think tells our stakeholders more about what our strengths are and what our areas of growth are as a district. An accountability measure that is available year-round and for the most part live throughout the year and not just a one-time shot, and doesn't boil everything down to a percentage. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about how the new SRSN accountability measure is coming into place, because this will be the first year that we utilize that. And then how that measures with what we have as our Comprehensive School Improvement Plan, or the CSIP, which is that 3-year school improvement plan. We had 60+ stakeholders develop that last year, and the Board of Education approved that in March of 2024. When we moved forward into the CSIP, we want to show you how the CSIP, our internal document, is going to marry into the SRSN school improvement document. Okay, so in August of 2023, the State Board of Education approved a school innovation waiver for 20 Missouri school districts, including R7, under the requirements of 161.214 of the revised Missouri statute, which was enacted in 2022. By approving that waiver, one of the criteria the State Board had to determine was that the innovation was based on sound educational practices, didn't endanger the health and safety of students, and did not compromise equal opportunity for learning. So essentially, the State Board of Education had due diligence to make sure that the waiver was based on best practice. So what was waived? And this is a slide straight from the State Board of Education's board meeting. And we're going to go through each of the items waived on the left and how we are responding to the district. So essentially, State Board of Education said, yes, as we approve this innovation waiver for these 20 school districts, R7 being one of them, the items on the left are waived. And so we'll walk through them each individually. The right column was the deliverable date that those districts had to bring something back to the State Board. So where is the SRSN and LSR7 in terms of our progress? So the first thing in terms of what was waived is that we were going to replace the existing Missouri School Improvement Program annual performance report with an alternative APR. So I mentioned that briefly. And Ms. Bergen's team was asked, we as a district were asked to make 3 videos for the SRSNs to use statewide. And so you will hear our voices and see some of our students, but these are SRSN videos that we were just asked to contribute to. So we're going to share a quick video here to answer the question about how will the new alternative APR reflect our work.
Success Ready Student Network, or SRSN, is leading a transformative approach to educational accountability in Missouri. Our goal? To provide real-time, transparent, accessible, and intentionally communicated data that informs continuous improvement and student success. Our new accountability model moves beyond traditional assessments and lagging indicators. Instead, it provides real-time data and ongoing feedback, allowing districts to make better instructional decisions for students. The SRSN has developed a landing page to help stakeholders understand key parts of the continuous improvement system. This includes explaining how each district is using interim assessments to measure academic readiness and growth to support student success in grades 3 through 8, English language arts, and mathematics. The state-level dashboard features student growth metrics, describing the extent to which a student is on track to demonstrate a foundational understanding of grade-level standards by the end of that school year. Academic readiness reflects a student's level of academic content knowledge at a point in time. Academic readiness with growth quadrant. That data combines the academic readiness measure with the growth measure to describe the extent to which students are growing as expected to demonstrate understanding of grade-level standards. The strength of this data-driven approach is not just evident at the state level. Each of the 20 districts using the alternative APR will have a dashboard for stakeholders to view data for each indicator. These dashboards will also go beyond the numbers, also using narratives, videos, and other media to tell its school community the story behind the data, stories that show students are mastering skills that support high school, college, and career readiness. An alternative APR champions transparency and honest reflection, celebrating success and identifying areas for improvement. Most importantly, it keeps the attention of the school communities on the thing that matters the most in public education, meeting student needs.
Okay, so the general idea here is that we're going to all have live dashboards that are lifetime, real-time data throughout the year, much more reflective of how we are performing than one-time shot percentage that shows up at one point in the year. Real quick, LSR7 dashboard. Actually, it says coming soon, but I do believe Ms. Bergen's team has it out there now. We have our dashboard out there with all of the criteria that both DESE and the SRSN have indicated are required in terms of our alternative dashboard. Okay? So, the second piece was that we were going to develop as a group an alternative measure of literacy, numeracy, for students in MAP, high school, and end of course assessments. Essentially, if you'll remember, we first thought maybe we would stop taking the MAP test. Yeah. Long term, that is still the goal. There are some pieces and parts that may not have been quite that simple in terms of technical advisory committees and federal waivers. We have a state waiver that waives us from the APR, but federal accountability is what requires us to take the MAP test. Right now, these 20 districts have permission to use for our state accountability system NWEA, Evaluate, iReady, or Renaissance Star, and we, of course, use NWEA for ours. We're using them as interim benchmarks, and that is what's feeding the dashboard that you just saw. As a group, the SRSN is filing a grant to the federal government, a grant request to the federal government, for the SRSN to lead the development of a new system of assessment that we would hope to eventually replace the MAP test for all 550 plus districts in the state, that includes both mastery and growth and is more fluid in nature than the one-time MAP test. So essentially, this organization hopes to build and develop the next iteration of testing for the state. We also had one of the videos we made for the SRSN involves some of our teachers and principals, and you might see someone else in here that you recognize. I'll share this quick video in terms of how our stakeholders feel about this idea in terms of interim testing versus the MAP test.
The Success Ready Student Network is a statewide organization of school districts that have come together to envision a new way of accountability and assessment and school improvement to put students first.
Utilizing a framework for school improvement is more meaningful as a building leader than a score or number on APR.
Benchmark assessments help me as a teacher in a way that MAP can't. The benchmark assessments are real-time data, and I can modify my instruction for my students or even an individual student immediately.
This would allow us to focus holistically on growth year-round, then have so much focus, pressure, and stress for a short snapshot of our students' learning.
Because it really speaks to what we as a district and other districts believe, which is that student learning is what should be represented in an accountability and an assessment system. And that when we focus on competency-based student learning, our students will be successful and our state will benefit from this success. And that all of our students across the state of Missouri will benefit from a form of accountability and assessment that is innovative and reflective of the best practices happening in the schools across the state. I really like the aspect where I can share data with students. I think that's a really big piece to their success, is knowing why. Why are we learning what we're learning every day?
When I get my scores, I sit with my teacher to see how I've done. She says, good job, because every time I keep on getting better.
Their excitement when they see those scores and they're like, I did improve. It's so much more valuable than having them get that back the next year and they're like, okay, and then move on.
Setting goals in class is important because we can work harder for the goals.
Holding us accountable to growth is really what education is about. Kids showing what they know and what they've learned over the course of the year is what I believe in as a teacher. It is a privilege to be part of the SRSN work that is making a difference for the future of districts, schools, teachers, and most importantly, students across the state of Missouri.
So you will notice that we identified ourselves by title but not school district because, again, the intention was to make a video for the SRSN districts across the way. The next piece that was incorporated in terms of being part of the waiver was to demonstrate market value assets. When we think about the SRSN 20 districts, we are all across the state of Missouri, and really those of us in the Kansas City metro area are just the leaders in the area of market value assets. It's a term that came out of the Kauffman Foundation, and so the Kansas City area districts are strong in this area, but there are many districts across the state that need a lot of support with it, so that is something that we should excel in and can be a leader with. But this is a quick glance at the SRSN video as it relates to market value assets, because that's another thing we would be held accountable for.
Market value assets, or MVAs, are cornerstone experiences that prepare students for future learning and employment. Early college credit opportunities, client-connected projects, internships, industry credentials, and entrepreneurial experiences are all examples of MVAs. Each allows students to learn about themselves and make informed decisions as they plan for life beyond high school. Take Owen, who used the design brief to create a new logo for a local school. This client-connected project taught him how to use creativity to stay within a client's parameters.
There's a lot of possibilities for graphic design. I was thinking about making it into a career in the future.
Or Reagan, who was connected to an internship with a local ranch, where she's gained management, sales, and event planning experience.
I order all the supplies, get all the cash registers ready. I manage the staff. I get all events supplies ready, and I assist most events.
Industry credentials and early college assets give students like Braden opportunities to earn certifications and dual credit. The aspiring ER nurse will graduate with certifications in basic life support skills, first aid, and OSHA 10 through his high school nursing program.
Through this class, I've earned dual credit through UCM, and that'll put me ahead of the game applying for nursing school. I'll be one step ahead of everybody because of what I've learned here.
Each MVA equips students with meaningful experiences beyond transcripts and GPAs and marketable skills that are in high demand by employers.
And I can talk about that in a job interview.
So much credit to Ms. Bergen's team in the PR department, because we operated on about a week and a half at the request to get that done, and they did an excellent job on all of the videos. So, all right, here we go. So in addition to that, by choosing the waiver, we have actually upped our responsibility more so than the other districts, because not only do we need to have our ongoing dashboard, we also have to commit to engaging in this CIF, the Continuous Improvement Framework, which is one of those acronyms I mentioned at the beginning. This continuous improvement framework is a set of criterion-based internal reflections in which we as a leadership team will sit and look at different categories and say, okay, do we think we're emerging? Do we think we're performing, or do we think we're a demonstration district? And these are areas like our curriculum work, our assessment work, our instruction work, all of the pieces that we know to be best practice and competency-based learning. It is a way to help guide school improvement and allow ourselves to self-measure. From the very beginning, we are working to ensure that everyone, including our Board of Education, all the boards of education, know that we all strive to be our very best. And so immediately we want to see everything in the blue, right? But the reality is every district should only have a couple of things in the blue. The blue is demonstration district. Like, you are so amazing at this. People should be coming from all over the state to see you executing it, right? Market value assets would be a place that we absolutely will be a demonstration district, and hopefully some others. But this is a reflective internal process that will be part of that APR process as well. Trying to get back to that presentation. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Someone back there may help me. Good help in the back. Okay, so then when we think about the CSIP, right? The Board of Education already approved a strategic plan, so are they in conflict with one another? Absolutely not. On purpose, we ensured that we worked with our stakeholders to know what was coming from the SRSN and how we would be held accountable and how we would be able to measure those things. So we just want to communicate that they are tightly aligned to the idea. You might have heard, PCBL or competency-based work, or the Marzano work, or you've heard proficiency scales. All of that work very aligned to SRSN. The utilization of data from NWEA, growth measures, ICAPS, market value assets, all in our CSIP. But just as a quick reminder, we're not going to read them all aloud. that this was the document that was board approved in March. It is the strategic goals, the 5 strategic goals, and the objectives or the measurements that go under each goal. I think you guys have seen this in a number of formats, right? But then we also said in an item of information to the Board of Education in March, here are the year-by-year strategies that we plan to do over the next 3 years to ensure that this work is happening. So for example, for strategic goal 1, which was the LSR7 district will ensure student growth and achievement, again, we included growth and achievement to be in alignment with the SRSN dashboard through access to high quality personalized educational opportunities. These were all of the year 1 strategies that were listed under that, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to ensure that this is actually happening. For strategic goal 2, fostering a responsive, inclusive, safe, and caring environment, these were all of the year 1 strategies that were listed to ensure that. Strategic goal 3, maintain high quality systems and structures to provide effective, efficient district operations. Again, lots of strategies that we had in place. 4, LSR7 will cultivate meaningful partnerships, internal and external stakeholders. Again, many year 1 strategies. And then 5, recruiting and retaining a high quality workforce and maintaining a focus on creating an environment in which well-supported adults serve students well. And then there are those strategies as well. So the real message from tonight is A, from the page to action. In August, every single champion, if you will, of an action item in one of those long list of strategies, so all of SLT, IoT, operations, they looked to that long list of year 1 strategies, and the task was find what you're involved in, find what you're responsible for, find what your people are responsible for, and report out to Dr. Shelton or myself, either where are you in the work, granted, it's just been since March and we're starting a new year, or what are the very specific tangible plans. So reporting out like, I'm starting a group in August as soon as teachers get back, and this is the work and this is the timeline. So we have very specific plans as to how we are going to ensure that the year 1 strategies are implemented. In addition to that, a new building improvement plan template was created to match the 24-27 LSR7 CSIP. This template is what every building principal is going to use for their building improvement plan, and it is directly aligned with the CSIP. What this means is that our building improvement plans are directly aligned and correlated to our CSIP. The work is in sync with each other. And then there are measurable places at each point along the way. You can see where it says October notes, September notes, and Dr. Kenny and Dr. Herzog work with our buildings to ensure that the building improvement plan progress is underway and is in alignment with the CSIP. In addition to that, there are going to be 2 school visits by me with Dr. Kenny or Dr. Herzog with the buildings throughout the year, and we're going to talk specifically about how each building is making progress on their BIP in relationship to support for the CSIP. So we are scheduled to bring to you in January, March, and June updates that will look and feel a little different than this one. This is sort of the where are we and kick off the year. In January, March, and June, you should expect from us to bring you some data. What have you done? What is the data showing? Or at least what is the work and how are we making progress? So that was what will come to you in terms of timeline. So with that, we're open to any questions, but again, intent was to really re-clarify what is the SRSN, what is this idea of an alternative APR, how does it relate to this new CIF, I thought we had a plan and I thought it was the CSIP, and how do they all go together? So open for any questions that you might have.
Board Member Miller?
Thank you. So the assessment, that looks really, really neat. And my question is, can you elaborate on how or if this will be like a game changer for parents to be able to follow maybe their students' progress?
Yeah, I think definitely in aggregate, it will be a game changer for our community, right? Very publicly available data with one click. I would hope that even in the existing system, students whose kids are taking the NWEA or parents whose kids are taking the NWEA are getting their fall, winter, and spring results back in terms of report and able to have some conversation about growth. One of the, you saw a little cruise there talking about it, but one of the nice things about all 4 of the interim measures, not just the one that we use, but because in order to meet the standard, all of those interim measures have to be deeply aligned to our state standards, statistically correlated to the MAP test, which they are, and to be able to show growth data for students so that they can see in real time, kid gets their MAP score in August the next year, like, okay. But when I can sit with my teacher and really talk about, this is where I was in September, this is where I am in December, what is my goal for May, it's a whole different conversation about what growing and learning means.
Thank you. And do we have, is there a standard across the board for our teachers meeting with the students to kind of go over that data? Do we have like a standard amongst buildings, grade levels, things like that you know of?
Yeah, I don't know that I can say that we have a standard. I mean, I think we have an expectation that we're communicating our scores, our students are aware of their scores, that we can talk about it. Does that look really different for the second grader than it does an eighth grader, of course? But yes, and not just for these assessments, and a large part of our PCBL work, which is the larger conversation, is about how kids are able to communicate where they are in their learning in general.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Board Member Myers?
Sure. So a couple questions, I guess. This is the teacher and me coming out. I see the social studies was left out of this deal again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and science as well. And so really, when we think about even high school in general, the end of course exams are remaining in place right now because there's not an NWEA or an interim measure at the high school level. So the EOCs will be in place, so we will typically use the government. You're right, in the same with science is typically a 5th grade, 8th grade grade span assessment, and social studies doesn't get measured until high school. And so do I think, pie in the sky, we want to make sure we have accountability and proficiency scales and measurement for all of those things. I also think SRN was trying to we've already taken about half the apple, and we probably should have taken a smaller bite. So I think we're trying to bite off what we know was required and expected of the federal government first. Yep.
That's a shame. That's also my opinion, but Desi is talking about, so we're talking about a revised, another rendition of a map in the pipeline. Is that what you were kind of alluding to for elementary?
Grades 3 through 8.
Okay.
Yeah, and really the iteration of that is DESE also is looking at what does the next generation of MAP look like? How do we measure growth? How do we really target it to a more flexible growth-based measure? Our testless the answer, our flexible test as adaptivity is a through-year testing. And as DESE was having the conversation, this conversation amongst districts was going on, and then really DESE said, let's collaborate and let SRSN sort of be the driving force so that it's stakeholder-driven in terms of creating the assessment plan. Now, the reality is getting a grant, getting a platform, writing an assessment, field testing, executing, and we're a few years out from at least just seeing that in play.
Right, because last thing, I guess, then what I'm hearing you say then is the EOC that literally has just gone into place in the last few years from just going through that whole process. At the high school level, that is going to continue to...
Yeah, I mean, yes, that is the place. Although the SRSN did have some conversation about the EOCs, because if there's a lot of ifs here, right? If we get the grant and we can start really writing through a lens of where's the student, where are they growing, how do we measure growth, do we do unit, maybe we give an assessment for these 3 units and then we do an assessment for these 3 units and then we add them together instead of an ends assessment, some of that logic. That concept can be equally applied to biology or government or American history. So, might that iteration grow potentially, but the plan 1 is to start with what's required.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Board Member Miller?
I have one more. So on slide, I guess it's slide 6 of the SRSN and CIP.
What's it say?
It's that one.
Okay.
So on there, it says there's a request for grant support. And so my question is, what is the amount of the grant that's being requested? Do we know? We have a dollar amount?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but when we think about grant, just for scale, we are asking the federal government to fund. I don't even know, to be honest, I'm not even sure there's a dollar amount. I would need to check with the people who are running the grant request. We are asking the federal government to essentially support and or provide funding and or orchestrate funding for a new assessment platform and complete execution of banks of test questions. It's an enormous amount of money.
Okay, and so with that, my follow-up is, if the grant is not, if we don't get the grant, you know.
Then what?
Yeah, are we still prepared basically to move forward to be able to implement and develop the assessment?
Right, so really, I mean, the answer to that is that's a larger SRSN team question. I will tell you that the evolution that got us to the grant was this. We were originally going to go to the federal government and ask them to approve NWA, Evaluate, iReady, and Renaissance as our assessments. And we got to the technical advisory committee and they said, I don't think you're going to get over the bar with that. And if you go one time and don't get over the bar, you may not get another chance at doing it. So instead, go to them and ask if they will help you craft something. So I don't know whether if the answer is no, we go back and say, okay, well now we're going to ask because it's what we have. That would just have to be a conversation over the 37 districts that are on the waiver as an organization.
Okay, thank you. And so we might have to pivot depending on
Yeah.
what comes down the pipe.
And I mean, I can't speak highly enough about how, I mean, genuinely proud I am of the work that we as a district and these other districts, I mean, we're coming together monthly. This is collaborative, this is thoughtful, this is heavy lifting, this is pivoting, this is thinking we're going left and going right, but it is also yielding what's going to be really good for kids.
It was a great presentation, and I really, to Katie's credit, I loved the videos, so thank you.
Board Member Garrett?
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. And maybe you answered one of them, and maybe I just missed it. So with this being real-time data, right, for what they're testing, how often were they going to be tested? Was it?
Okay, so that's a good question. It's sort of asked, in the short term, while we are talking about NWEA, we're going to use our same system, right? Fall, winter, spring. So maybe it should say real-time-ish, right? Like real-time in terms of the most current iteration of the test window. The dream the SRSN has for the new assessment, if you will, involves the idea of some micro testing so that there's never the like, and it's April 5th and we're giving you the 3 days of 4-hour testing, you know, but instead the ability to say, like, we just finished the unit on, or these 2 units, and we're going to give you the summative assessment, and then that's going to get banked up here, and then we do and then that gets banked up here, and then at the end those get added together and we turn it in. So a whole new approach. Theoretically, that then becomes like the unit test, right? So the intention is to minimize the test fatigue and exposure and maximize meaningfulness of test data.
That's so smart. I love that. I love it.
They do get worn out. I know my kids do. It's a lot. And my second question, I think I just forgot it. Give me a second here. So, and I might be dating myself here a little bit, but I'm not really sure what the testing process looks like for them. And I've got one that'll be going into high school and one that's in middle school. So is this like computerized where they have to make selections on the testing, or is
so
it?
NWE or the MAP test?
Well, for the one that we're talking about, the
Okay,
real time.
so right now our kids are still taking the MAP test because the federal government still requires that, right? We got the state waiver, so the MAP test doesn't count for our state scores anymore, but we still take it because the federal government requires it. We're trying to really pivot our emphasis and focus on how they're doing on the NWEA because we feel like it's a more meaningful test. But to answer your question, the NWEA is an adaptive computer-based assessment. Get a question right, it gets you a little harder one. Get a question wrong, gets you a little easier one, and you go till it finds your level, and then it kind of sets your level. Okay. That is in class, in the classroom on the computer. MAP testing is grades 3 through 8, also on the computer. It's multiple days of sessions, so you'll have like session 1 ELA, when you might do multiple choice, and session 2 is a different kind of multiple choice, and then some grade levels have writing prompts where you actually type the essay in. And then at the high school, what Board Member Myers was talking about, the end of course exams, those are associated with 4 specific courses. At the end of the course, it is an electronic assessment, and it measures just that particular course.
Thank you.
Vice President Eslick?
Thank you. My question was also on the end of course exams, part of which you kind of already answered. But I was just curious about the optional assessments that are listed on the dashboard for Algebra 2, American History, English, Geometry, just for anybody else who's not looking at it. Personal finance, all those. It's not on the slide. It's actually the Success Ready, the dashboard that's on our website. So my question is, are we currently, for the ones that say optional, are we giving those assessments at the end of those courses or no?
We are not. The one exception to that, gets a little complicated, are Algebra 2 students who are sophomores. So our students who took algebra in 8th grade have to take the Algebra 2 end of course exam, because there is a requirement that you take an algebra-based test in each building. So because they took their algebra test in the middle school, the sophomores who are in Algebra 2 have to take the Algebra 2 test because they need one in their high school building. The kids who take Algebra 1 in 9th grade don't take the Algebra 2 end of course exam because they have their algebra test in the high school building as a 9th grader.
So for the others, aside from the algebra example, why aren't we doing some of those assessments? Like, I look at physical science or personal finance, physical science, American history, and I think those are super important, especially personal finance. So why don't we currently do those?
Typically, the mindset has been that we have internal final exams, and that the idea of layering an end of course exam was just an added assessment that wasn't necessary.
So from an accountability standpoint then, is there another way that we would be able to utilize the existing exam structure to report out to the community and make that part of it? I mean, I look at personal finance as like a big one. I also think American history is very important, but personal finance, that is definitely something that I would love to see assessed, because that is definitely following along with that mission right there, because that's something they're going to encounter the moment most of those students graduate. And the course, I don't know if you clicked your button because you don't think very highly of the course, which could be a totally different conversation. So if the course is not quality, then obviously, regardless, I don't know. I'm guessing why you pushed your button, but regardless, I just think I'm gonna turn it over to her because I already said what I said, so I'm done.
Well, to follow up, I think that was a very, very good question. What's the cost to give one of these tests? Because my assumption as a person that was on the other side of this, that cost was part of this is what we have to do, and there are cost factors, right?
We do pay for the assessments. I'd have to look to see how much. Honestly, I don't know that off the top of my head. I also think genuinely, and again, we are open to continued conversation. At the time when EOCs came on and had evolved, it had sort of been through the lens of, this is a required external accountability measure that may or may not be the most ideal form of measurement of how our students are learning. And so to add, I couldn't agree more. We need to make sure our kids have an excellent, strong personal finance experience, American history understanding, but was sort of is there value add in terms of really knowing what our kids know? Is there a better way to do that? I think that's just been kind of the conversation.
Totally understand. So if the assessment is something that you feel doesn't have value and it's optional, then to me that means as a district we could create our own and still show data that says this is where our students are, but we've created an assessment we felt more meaningfully assess the students, and this is what they've learned.
Beautifully. Like when we think about common assessments and common finals, we are moved to a common final structure in the last year. So we will have comparability data there where all of our teachers are taking in the same data. Now that's comparison to self, not comparison to others, right? But we are also moving to, again, much longer conversation, but that idea of proficiency scales in which we'll be able to articulate X number of students are out of 3, X number of students are out of 2, X number of students are out of 4 in relationship to this learning target or this critical concept. It doesn't yield that same comparability to other districts, but it absolutely allows us to communicate publicly where our kids are.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, I just have a couple more questions.
You bet.
I'm sorry. You were
No,
like,
you're
"We're done?" Okay, so I've heard from critical members in the community that say we can't compare how our students are doing from year to year because standards like MAP tests keep changing. So how would this plan allow for measurable indicators that create benchmarks to allow for future measurements to realistically measure our academic progress?
I think that's a beautiful question and actually really speaks to the idea of NWEA. It's a long-standing nationally normed assessment that allows us to compare it to the nation, but also if we really needed to, we could do a Missouri comparison. We'd have to get some data from them. But I think they're right. The tests change so often that it's difficult to look at the data. When we look at NWEA, which we know is aligned to state standards, we can statistically see that, and we have long-standing data of a nationally normed test. It helps alleviate that problem.
Thank you. And my next question is that we have recently provided for the UFly curriculum to be available in all of our district elementary schools. So would any literacy improvements that result from this change be captured with this dashboard?
In time. Yes. I mean, obviously, when we bring a new resource in that we believe to be a good research-based resource to design to help improve instruction, we would hope to see that data and scores would increase. I think it would be naive to say that any implementation of anything that we did would immediately and the scores are magical, a month later. But I do think we should see incremental improvement for a number of reasons: letters training, best practices, UFly, a number of things that we have done. We should be able to see growth. And to me, I think the NWEA place is the place to see it, as well as some of our MTSS data, much more accurately. There's sort of a misperception out there that MAP, particularly in ELA, is like, can our kids read? MAP is a very poor indicator of that. That's not what that measures. MAP is so broad stroke, it doesn't get into the minute skill in a way that we can here. So yes, but with some time.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Do we have any additional questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, then, our work session is adjourned.